Chapter 3. A Happy Coincidence. Rhouala woke the next morning and prepared herself for one of the busiest days of the year. Perhaps if she had been born a man, or into different species, she could have been an apprentice at a respectable trade of some kind, as she was certainly handy enough to do so. She could be a wandering minstrel, for though her voice was not the sweetest to be heard, she could hold her own with the lute. How aggravating, then, she thought as she pulled on rough knee-high stockings, that she must, like every morning, hide her personality, skill, and dreams under the coarse brown dress and headscarf of a barmaid. After wrestling her with her shoes, she stood up, straightened her back, and examined herself in the cracked partial mirror that occupied her sparsely furnished room. She perhaps could have afforded some new things, but she was, in point of fact, saving her money for a trip. She had not yet decided where or when, but a vacation was very much in order after this year's celebration. Somewhere quiet, she thought, and came out of her room and down the stairs into the Black Pony's main hall, into which hungry guests were just beginning to file. The day went on as one might expect. Rhouala was a professional at crowds, of swatting away the fingers of pickpockets and perverts, of hearing slurred orders placed half a room away, of being asked, begged, or threatened for a room to stay in. She was proficient at removing those who were too intoxicated to do so themselves, and of collecting what was due when the customers attempted to dodge out without emptying their pockets. From above, say for instance, the second-floor balcony, it would have looked like a frantic ballet. Trays with fried fish and bowls of stew, brown bread and shanks of meat, of tankards of ale and wine, all balanced and spinning to and fro at a remarkable speed from one side of the hall to the other. There were other dancers, too, but they were far more graceless, and there was much spilled, broken, and bumped into by the other serving girls. To an observer, of which there did happen to be one, Rhouala would have stood out like a feline among buffoons, skirts whirling out as she spun in one direction, then another, without spilling so much as a single drop of wine. The cool fall day wore on, and evening slowly crept in, causing the shadows to stretch slowly and envelop the town. Rhouala took a break outside, watching the performers. Come and go, and massaging her sore feet. After tonight, only 2 days remained of the Harvest Festival, and though it was a gala affair, she would not be sorry to see it end. Shortly thereafter, Rhouala was on her way to the garbage heap with the most recent load of refuse, when she heard heavy footsteps and breathing. She looked at the tree line, which lay directly past the garbage heap, and saw the silhouette of a man, bent over, one hand on the trunk, seeming to gasp and moan in dismay. She dropped off the trash and stood for a moment in the ambient light that diffused out of the windows of the pony. "Hello," called Rhouala cautiously. "Who's there? Are you hurt?" She didn't move, but waited for a response, while reaching into her pocket for a tiny stiletto, just to be safe. She wrapped her hand around the small, comforting object and squeezed calmed by the presence of it. "Rhouala?" called the man. "It is I, Alvar, your worshipful slave. I am in desperate pain. Oh, please help me, Rhouala." He called to her and limply reached the hand not supporting his frame out in her direction. In it he also held a bottle of wine, with only a small measure left. Alvar. Oh, for goodness sake, thought Rhouala to herself. He was clearly filled from boot to hat with spirits, and was supporting himself on a tree. Rhouala could see the evening light as her eyes adjusted to the dimness outdoors. He showed no apparent injuries at all, at least not from a glance, though he did seem to be in either acute physical or mental anguish. She stood her ground, and did not move towards or away from the massive form of Alvar. "Please, Rhouala, my heart and body ache for your embrace. I am a lost man, and I believe I shall die if you do not alter your decision and return with me at this very instant." He gripped his chest as if he were keeping his heart from bursting out of his ribcage, but was thrown off balance by the movement and stumbled for a moment before he regained his posture. Rhouala considered Alvar's drunkenness to be entirely unsurprising, as a great deal of his time had been spent in celebration of the week's end, the harvest beginning, ending, the sun setting, the cat catching a rodent, or the grass growing. Rhouala had made the mistake of being charmed by Alvar's initial sweetness, and had begun to spend some afternoons that she did not work with him, only to discover that he was not only remarkably fond of drink and women, but that he was also possessed of a great aversion to actual labor, and avoided it at all costs. The more she had gotten to know Alvar, the less she cared for him, and the more he cared for her. She had ended their courtship with finality one late afternoon, when he had attempted to convince her to participate with himself in an evening of wine and strenuous love-making, followed by a quick wedding, after which Alvar would promise to find a job if only Rhouala would support him for a few years. She finally lost her exceptional patience with Alvar, gave him a long-deserved smack across the face, and stomped home. He had trailed her for some time, apologizing and modifying the terms of his suggestion. Finally he became enraged and began to shout names at her, but by then she had reached the pony, and Lilias had been there to chase him off, which she had done so with gusto. But now he stood, his 6.5-foot frame sagging slightly, and his face clearly the subject of a fight or three. He called to her, "Oh, Rhouala, beautiful flower Rhouala, what a madman I've been, what a fool! I shall perform any feat of bravery, beat any man or woman to a pulp. I would do anything you asked, if only you would let me into your bedroom. I have been cruelly evicted from my very own house, and have nowhere to sleep but on this cold, hard ground, and every time I close my eyes, I am tortured by dreams of you and your soft, warm skin. I have never done more than hold your hand, oh, coy and demure Rhouala. What a great comfort it would be, if only you would let me into your room and your skirts. Ask anything of me, anything, and I shall perform the task as long as my reward is your pillow. Oh, sweet, young, tender lady." Rhouala snorted disdainfully, and asked, "Well then, for what no doubt illegitimate reason have you been heaved from your abode, Alvar? Did you neglect to pay the rent again, or rather, were the funds somehow lost or stolen from your innocent possession?" Alvar wheedled pathetically. "It is so much worse than that, Rhouala. I have lost all the money that my kindly parents left to me, when a cheater came to my 4-card Bigsy table and took it all from me. Ah, it's too cruel! The false bastard cheated. I know it, but I could not divine by what manner before he departed. Alvar moaned and approached Rhouala, who was dwarfed by the brutish, hulking drunk. She backed away towards the pony. "Alvar, you make highly unwise choices, and your desires do not align with mine at all. There is nothing I want from you, and I have no intention of sharing my bed with you, this evening or ever. The inn, as you know full well, is booked far beyond capacity, and I have no ability to find a free place for you to sleep. Go to the temple. Perhaps they can assist you. Now I go to bed. Alone, Alvar." Alvar wobbled for a moment, clearly trying to decide what to do. He rubbed his red face and pushed a bit of dangling brown hair away from his small, dark eyes. "You will not help your dear old Alvar, who I know you still care about? Will you not even help him with enough coins to buy a new carafe of wine?" He guzzled what remained in the bottle he had and looked down at the petite but proud young barmaid. "No, Alvar, you have had quite enough. Now be off with you." Alvar bristled, his woe slowly turning to rage. "How dare you tease me like that? You lead me on for weeks, and then toss me as though I were a bit of unwanted garbage. You are a barmaid, Rhouala, not a princess. That makes you a whore, and a cheap one at that. I see all the men you talk to. I know you devote your attentions toward them, and not me. Though it is I that needs you. You will come with me. I have made up my mind. You are a trollop who does not know her place, but I shall show you." He grabbed her before she had any time to react. And though he was drunk as is humanly possible, he was still massively strong, and at least twice the size of poor Rhouala. She managed to maintain her hold on the small knife she carried, but with his meaty arms grasping her, she could not reach it. So she gripped it tightly and simply did her best to kick Alvar where it would hurt the most. Sadly, to no avail. Alvar had indeed been known for his occasionally violent outbursts, which he would later sorely regret. There are some people in this world who are influenced far more than others, when base desire, spirits, and anger collide. Alvar was one of them. As he tore off into the woods with his captive, Alvar tried to formulate some kind of plan to follow. But even sober, no one would claim he was the most intelligent man they had ever met. So, presently, he opted to simply satisfy his physical desires and be done with it, so that perhaps his mind could finally be rid of Rhouala's endless presence. It was quite dark, and she was struggling furiously, much to his irritation. He stopped after what he judged to be a sufficient distance from town, so that if she screamed, she would not be heard. He threw her against a tree, and panting and sweating excitedly, he began to unfasten his breeches with one unsteady hand. Perhaps now she would not be so high and mighty, Alvar thought to himself with a satisfied grin. Alvar gripped Rhouala's wrists above her head, against the tree, again preventing her from reaching her hidden blade. "Now just stay quiet, and I'll be through with you soon enough. You need to learn your place, girl, and I shall be the one to show you." He drew his pants down to his knees and began to wrestle with her skirts. Rhouala kicked and screamed at Alvar, but the determined oaf would not cease. However, at the very moment she was certain he would have his way, Alvar's eyes became as large as saucers. He made a strange and indistinct croaking noise, and the horrified Rhouala watched as a tiny thread of blood leaked out of the side of his mouth. It dripped onto the leaves below, and for several seconds that seemed to stretch into hours, Alvar wavered and swayed strangely. His eyes focused on a far distant point, and then he crumpled and fell to the earth and lay still. Rhouala looked down and saw clearly. Protruding from his back was an arrow, buried so deeply that it had no doubt punctured his heart. She called out quietly, her voice shaky from the shock of what had almost transpired. "Hello? Who's there? Who has killed Alvar? Who has rescued myself and preserved my dignity?" A dark figure stepped quickly into a beam of moonlight, sifting through the trees. "That would be me, Miss Rhouala," said Galen, who materialized out of the brush. He held in one arm a bow, and over his shoulder a quiver. "I don't suppose I could offer to see you home safely," he suggested. Rhouala took a stride, then another, and finally, standing inches from the man who had saved her, collapsed onto his chest in tears and nodded furiously. Galen silently put his free arm around the hysterical maiden for a moment, and then led her, one arm about her shoulders, back to the warm glow of the black pony.